and a stronger team, more credible team with him. And I'm hoping that we will be able to resolve that in the weeks to come. I hope as well that the message will have got through to Theresa May and the Conservatives that they've got to govern in an entirely different way, that they've got to be collaborative within themselves, they've got to be cooperative and reach out to other parties, they've got to take Parliament seriously, and they've got to take the community and the country seriously. And one final thing, people will say, oh, well, this is going to be very dangerous for Brexit and for negotiation. It was never the majority in Parliament. It was always about what we could do to persuade diplomatically the other 27 governments in Europe, what was in their interests as well as in ours. And if the Tory party would now become a little humbler, take a step back and actually address the needs of Britain, and we in opposition, both in the Commons and in the House of Lords, can actually modify what they propose to do, because they don't have legitimacy for some of the more outrageous elements of their manifesto, then Britain could be governed in a much better way.
Owen, you've been a supporter of Jeremy Corbyn, I think it's fair to say, but not always totally so. You've had your reservations about him. Can I just begin at the beginning on this? Do you think it's possible at this point in the evening, do you sense that it's possible that he will end up in number 10 when tonight is done?
Well, firstly, I mean, what David Blunkett said there, I have a lot of sympathy for it, but in terms of his team, if these results are anywhere near true, then they are vindicated today, the strategy they pursued. So I think we should be clear about that. And I, for one, I'm going to show humility towards them, because I think the two things we learned from this campaign are this. Firstly, and this is the marker, because there is every chance that the results will shift towards the Tories in the way in 1992 and 2015, the exit polls originally, by the end of 2015, I was wishing the exit poll was correct. Of course, you had a shift.
But they might stay exactly where they are. And what I'm just driving in is whether you think he might form a government.
But this is the point I'm making to you. What was the starting point of this whole campaign? Theresa May launched this campaign to crush the opposition in Britain. She started this campaign with a lead of between 20 and 25%. She had in some polls double the support of the Labour Party. Her personal ratings far above those of Jeremy Corbyn. Labour were losing by-elections, council by-elections. The local elections, not that long ago, they got a drubbing. Even if there's a shift towards the Conservatives and they win the majority, this is an absolute calamity for Theresa May and the Conservative Party. Let me just finish, because David had quite a long go there. An absolute calamity for Theresa May, and her authority lies in ruins. The second point, not only did we see, I think, during the course of this campaign, when people could see Jeremy Corbyn unfiltered, on broadcast media, able to put his case forward, the first impression they got in a country whose press is vicious and unrelenting and almost exclusively in support of the Conservative government, he showed that he wasn't how he was portrayed. The second point, the policies he put forward and the Labour Party put forward, that you ask those at the top of society who are doing very well indeed to pay a bit more money to invest in the NHS, in education, in public services, that we have a genuine living wage in this country, that workers have basic rights and security, that we bring back the utilities of this country back away from foreign government control or profiteers, under the control of the people of this country. No, that resonated with people. And the British commentariat who were on the press in this country, who were almost overwhelmingly aggressively opposed to those ideas, are going to have to show humility tonight, because all of the policies they support are being challenged.
The only thing I would say about that is that he didn't win.
No,
we're picking this out as a potential triumph. But if these figures are right, Jeremy Corbyn has not won an election.
You are shifting the goalposts here. We got to start.
Normally, an election is about winning.
No one ever thought there was a chance in hell that Labour was going to win this election.
No, I'm not saying he didn't do very well. I'm just saying he still didn't win.
And the reason he came back from a situation where Labour was on course, in some newspapers, predictions where they get 120 seats, that was in the Times, for example, the only way they've defied those political predictions that Labour would be extinguished as a political force in only a few weeks. It wasn't enough to turn it around, given where they started, was those policies and those ideas.
But
David, can I just stop you? We're just going to go to hear a result at Sunderland Central, and this may give us an indication of how the night is beginning to pan out.
The total number of votes for each candidate for the Sunderland Central constituency is as follows. Sean Christopher Coburn, Independent, 305 votes. Julie Elliott, Labour Party, 25,056 votes. Rachel Sarah Featherstone, Green Party candidate, 705 votes. Niall Dane Hodgson, Liberal Democrat, 1,777 votes. Gary James Layton, UK Independence Party, 2,209 votes. Robert Jeffrey Oliver, Conservative Party, 15,059 votes. And I therefore declare that Julie Elliott has been
a Labour hold, as we said to you a little while ago. It popped up on the screen. No big surprise in that. But I'm just going to bring in Colin. Can I just bring you in here to talk about the change in the share of the vote? I'm just going to bring that up to assess what this tells us about the rest of the country.
No, that's similar to the other Sunderland seat, Tom, and indeed the kind of shift from UKIP towards Labour and Conservative that I think we were perhaps expecting before the evening began in these sort of leave-type areas such as Sunderland Central. So the Conservative vote is up by 10 percentage points on where it was in 2015. And actually, remember, in 2010, there was even talk that Sunderland Central could be a surprise Conservative gain at that election. So it's the best chance that the Conservatives have in that city. The Labour vote, though, is also up again, but by 5 points. But we are still seeing that in the country as a whole that we think the Labour vote is going to be up by more than the Conservative vote. Though, to emphasise again, both parties look as if they're increasing their share tonight.
But in short, these seats, which we thought would tell us a lot, we were expecting in all these early seats that the UKIP vote would move wholly to the Tories, and that would tell us to some extent how it was going to pan out nationwide. It's a bit more complicated, and it's not. If I assess you right, it's a little bit unclear what these seats are telling us so far.
Newcastle has behaved so far. One result from Newcastle has behaved slightly differently to in Sunderland. In the two Sunderland seats, it was more like the pre-expected pattern. That, again, putting it crudely, people have been churning, leaving the Greens and going to Labour, leaving Lib Dems, going to Conservatives, all kinds of things going on. But the aggregate in Sunderland is the Conservatives are putting on more votes than is Labour, which of course means there's been a swing to the Conservatives in these two seats in Sunderland. And of course, if that were repeated across the country, the exit poll would look rather shy for the Conservatives, and they would be expecting a majority and a clear majority at that. But again, this is a very small part of the northeast of England. It does not characterise what happens in the rest of the country, and we just must wait for the Midlands to come in, the other side of the Pennines, parts of the southeast, before we can be too sure what's happening.
So it's going to be several hours, I'm sure, I think, before we'll begin to get a sense of picture of how the country is performing generally. Can I just, David, can I just pick up with you? One simple point. David, you've been around, you know how the internal politics of the Labour Party works. Jeremy Corbyn has clearly done, as Owen said, much better than people expected. He has not won an election. He stays as leader, or there's a move to get rid of him now? What's your sense of how it'll play out?
I certainly don't think it'll play out over this weekend or in the immediate weeks ahead. I've acknowledged the fact that I think we should accord Jeremy the credit he deserves. I think that it will now be down to him, as well as the parliamentary party, who have put in a fantastic performance on the ground. I mean, I'm really, really pleased that so many colleagues are back, not least because I've put quite a bit of money of my own into some of these marginal seats, that actually the battle before the general election morphed into a unity, which we were all part of, those who were for Jeremy and those who were very sceptical, including me. And we pulled together. And I think if there's a will to do that, to have an elected shadow cabinet, to get the trade unions on board in terms of a positive view of the future, we can actually make the Labour Party a fantastic force for mobilising people on the ground with that anti-austerity measure and doing the things that some of us want to do, which is to prepare to actually be there rather than being nearly there.
OK, well, listen, if the poll is correct, one thing is for sure, Jeremy Corbyn did a whole lot better than most people expected him to at the start of the evening, as Owen and David were just reflecting on there. Now, as I said earlier in the evening, Robert Peston is out in the media hub, so let's just see what he's picking up. Robert, over to you for a moment.
Well, what I would say is that there's a bit of bemusement both here and when I talk to the parties themselves about what's going on, simply because although, the exit poll is plainly the most accurate predictor of what's going to happen that we've had so far. Nonetheless, as you've been pointing out with Colin, the early results from the northeast are not completely consistent with that. The Tories are doing rather better in those seats than the exit poll would imply. Now, one of the things that some analysts are looking at is whether postal votes are a factor that the exit poll didn't pick up in as sensitive a way as perhaps one would have liked, and Colin will doubtless be able to elaborate on that, because the Tories, I think, definitely believe that they've won a very significant proportion of the postal votes, partly because I think lots of postal votes are older voters and they have tended to vote Tory. Now, the other swing factor in all of this is obviously the much larger than anticipated in some quarters anyway, vote by younger people. And again, what's unclear, and there was quite a lot of analysis of this before the election, what's unclear is whether that large surge in young people's votes has been spread across the country in a way that would help Labour, or whether it has been concentrated, and some people think this is the case, in largely Labour seats, in which case the surge in young people would help Labour, but not as much as perhaps the exit poll is saying. So really all I'm saying is something that you and everybody you've been talking to has been pointing out, is that it's going to be a very long night. The broad themes are plainly true. Jeremy Corbyn has done a lot better than many people thought was imaginable just a few weeks ago, and Theresa May has done a lot worse than she hoped. But it is still, I think, conceivable that she will end up with a proper majority. We'll just have to wait and see.
OK, Robert, thank you very much indeed. Well, we are just waiting for Newcastle upon Tyne East, and as we've been discussing, we're really going to have a slightly broader selection of seats before we can begin to assess whether this exit poll is heading in the right direction or whether it has perhaps underestimated the Tories' performance nationwide. Juliet Bremner is in the region. Juliet, what have you been managing to pick up this evening about what's going on there?
Well, I think what Robert's just been telling you is absolutely right. Of course, we have a big student population here in Newcastle, where I am tonight, and we've seen a huge increase in the turnout in all three of the counts. We're actually just about, I think, to get another count. I'm hearing it behind me. But we've got a 15% increase in turnout in the east. We've got a 10% increase of turnout in the central constituencies, both covering the universities. Of course, these are safe Labour seats, as you said from the beginning, but I think it shows that they have very probably mobilised that young vote, but in the safer seats. At the beginning of this evening, we were looking to see where the Leavers' votes might go. And yes, it's true, in the only count we've had declared so far, that we saw that the UKIP vote had disintegrated. It had gone largely to the Labour Party, but some had also gone to the Conservative Party. But I think you get back to the point that Robert was making to you. These are safe seats, so it's not actually going to change that overall map that you keep looking at back in the studio. However, I think that they will be delighted that they've mobilised what I think must be the young part of the constituency here to come in and to vote for them.
Juliet, thank you very much indeed. So, where do we think we are at this point in the evening? It's quite hard making sense of it, isn't it, really? The exit poll tells us one thing, the results don't necessarily bear that out.
Well, I think, first of all, you've called Swindon North, and when we get the result, that'd be a really interesting seat to look at. I mean, I don't think anyone was expecting Labour to take it, but, that's a southern seat, different from these northeast seats. I think you come back to the point that, the exit poll has a variation around it. This is all within the variation that was set out at the beginning, and there are two hurdles. There are two hurdles for the Conservative Party. They're obviously the most important hurdle. I'm a Conservative who, recommended to my readers in the Evening Standard that people vote Conservative. The first hurdle is to form the government. Obviously, the most important hurdle. There is a second hurdle, which is Theresa May called this election to strengthen her hand. And that is, the second hurdle. So I think, we'll see how the thing plays out. So we might not be in very early days. You don't know whether you're going to be in a hung parliament situation or a situation where the Tories can form a government with the Irish Unionists, or there's a small Conservative majority. But none of these are in the big Tory majorities that we were talking about a few weeks ago.
We can say one thing reasonably clearly, that unless the result is very off, Theresa May has not had a good night. She started with what seemed like an unassailable lead. She called the election to get a clear mandate for Brexit. She hasn't got an unassailable lead now. She might not even have a majority. Be clear, does she survive as Tory leader in your view? You've seen a Tory bit of internecine fighting or two in the Tory party.
We're going to go to the results.
It's going to be very hard.
Sorry, Ed, I can't hear anything in the studio, so we're going to Newcastle upon Tyne East.
The total number of votes for each candidate for the Newcastle upon Tyne East constituency is as follows. Nicholas Hugh Brown, Labour Party, 28,127. Alistair Christian Ford, Green Party candidate, 755. Simon John Kitchen, the Conservative Party candidate, 8,866. Tony Sanderson, UK Independence Party, UKIP, 1,315. Wendy Barbara Taylor, Liberal Democrats, 2,574. And that Nicholas Hugh Brown has been duly elected to serve as member.
OK, so there we have it. Labour back in the seat. Colin, can I
mean, look, this is a stonking result for Labour. I mean, Nick Brown's been there a long time. He and I were at university together more years ago than I would like to think.
More or less yesterday.
Yeah, more or less yesterday. But he's mopped up the Green vote, he's mopped up the Lib Dem vote. The UKIP vote has perhaps gone a little bit Conservatives, but his vote is up 18 percentage
Well, let's just have a look at the change in the share of the vote, actually, while we talk.
68% of the vote in Newcastle East, a Remain area, a student area, lots of these people with higher education qualifications, the kind of people that the exit poll was suggesting were flooding over to the left of centre parties tonight.
So, to be clear, is this tends to suggest the exit poll is bang on?
Well, no, I'm not going to say bang on, but both are
heading in the right direction.
In Newcastle, Labour are doing very well. In Sunderland, Labour are doing less well than the Conservatives. Sunderland was a Leave area, Newcastle was a Remain area. But if you put the whole package together over the country as a whole, it still looks as if we're going to get that narrowing of the gap between Labour and the Conservatives.
Allegra, just given what Colin was just saying there about student area and all the rest of it.
Remain.
And Remain. Are we looking at... I mean, one thing we can be clear about, we all ran into many, many people younger than us who were absolutely furious that we were being taken out of the European Union, a lot of whom hadn't voted. It was almost like a wake-up call. Is this the result, do you think?
Well, indeed, and also the other day there was some work done by Nat Sen, who do very, very robust polling, and they were suggesting that the youth huge turnout wasn't going to actually transpire. So this has caught a lot of people by surprise, not just regular pollsters, even people who drill down very, very, very deep. There's a possibility that we thought this wasn't turning into the Brexit election. Actually, maybe it is a Brexit election, but it's not the one we thought. We thought it was going to see these droves of leavers. Actually, is it Remain voters who we had thought, again because of other sorts of polling, were not actually going to display their Remain feelings? Actually, maybe they have, because as Colin says, in this one seat, just one, but you've got the Green and the Lib Dems folding behind Labour. One other point, people were very, very critical about Jeremy Corbyn's position on Brexit, because it did seem to be two things. On the one hand, we're going to vote to trigger Article 50. On the other hand, at the end of it all, we want to have a vote on the final package. Maybe that two-facedness has actually helped them in a whole range of seats, allows them to take back some Remain voters.
Ed, what's your assessment of what we just heard?
I think Allegra's right. That what we're seeing here is the divisions we saw in the referendum last year being reflected now in the general election. We know that the Remain vote was much stronger in the cities than in the towns and the rural areas. And the results we've seen so far show that in the seats in the northeast, where there was a clear Remain majority, Labour's been gaining, but in those seats in Sunderland, where there was a Leave majority, the UKIP vote has been going more to the Conservatives than to Labour. The question, though, is if Labour is not going to make gains in leave towns and marginal seats in the suburban areas in the north, how is it going to make the gains in the exit poll? And the answer will be, if the exit poll is right, substantial Labour gains in the south of England and in the East Midlands, which was not what any of us were expecting, but it may be what's going to happen.
While you were talking, Ed, we've had a result in from Swindon North, which is a
George was just mentioning,
Conservative seat. Change of share compared to the last time.
Let's just
Tories
bring it up.
up 3, Labour up 10.
Right.
Okay. That's where Labour are going to make
And
their
that was, I
gains
think,
if they're repeated in those kinds of areas where the margin between the parties is much
and
narrower.
that seat was not in the top 100, I think, of Labour targets.
Well, no,
if you start thinking then about
Labour have come nowhere near winning it tonight.
But what kind of seats do you think
but
that would
Amber
bring into
Rudd
play?
in Hastings suddenly looks much more vulnerable on these numbers.
Which
Well,
some
look,
people thought she could lose.
Look, Swindon is very interesting. Swindon, first of all, Tony Blair held both those seats all the time he was Prime Minister. And, of course, we're still talking about a Labour Party that is well short of an overall majority, even though they're doing better than expectations. And if you were ever to have a majority Labour government, they need to be winning in Swindon North. But if it's true that the Labour Party is doing much better in these southern seats, or the university towns like Newcastle, that is going to be a challenge for the Conservatives as the night goes on. On the other hand, the Conservatives are hoping to pick up a lot of suburbs and towns around the north and the Midlands, which are, feel a bit left behind by economic prosperity and globalisation. That's the explicit Conservative pitch at this election. So, if you're in Bury and Bolton, you might be thinking, well, I might be going to be OK tonight. So it's going to be quite an interesting dynamic. And I know people, if you, in the northeast, Newcastle is different from Sunderland. They feel differently. They have a different economic situation.
I'm not sure you're right there. Actually, I don't think the Labour needs to win Swindon North to get a majority. It wins Swindon North when it wins a very substantial majority. I think the interesting thing, which Allegra picked up a moment ago, we all thought that the Remainers, the hardcore, were over here, and that the group in the middle were actually sort of thinking, let's leave it to Theresa May to get on with it. And it may be that soft middle in the Brexit vote was rather put off by being told, let me get on with it, and no deal is better than any deal.
And not being given any more information.
Well, actually, George was mentioning the North East, so let me just go and have a chat with Jane at the wall about exactly what is happening. Jane, what's your assessment of what we've seen today?
So one of the things that we'll do, obviously, throughout the night is look at how the picture is unfolding, and we can look at the North East, and we can see that Labour has held those 4 seats, and perhaps we can look at the share, first of all, just to see the picture emerging, and there you see that whopping Labour share, but of course that's where Labour tends to do much better. Let's look at the change in share. So the change in share there, you see the real strong UKIP collapse, which was to be the story of the night. We expected it to go back to the Conservatives.
On the different boards that we had earlier, but never mind, we've got some more.
But here we are, going back to Labour and the Conservatives, and I think what we're talking about here, we're talking about a Remain vote, but we're also talking about left-wing voters and right-wing voters. So we know that there are UKIP voters who shared Theresa May's more right-of-centre appeal, more authoritarian. I'd imagine they're going back to the Conservatives. But, of course, there are UKIP voters who took more left-wing positions. In our data, we saw them sort of sticky towards UKIP at the beginning, I think not sure where to go. Towards the end of the campaign, moving more over to Labour. So I think that's very much the story so far, obviously very early in the night, but we'll be keeping a very close eye on how the Remain vote is going for Labour, how the Young vote is going, and in each of those 4 seats that we have results for, turnout is up. Absolutely crucial to Labour's early signs of success.
OK, which is perhaps a bit of a surprise. I'm not sure many of us came into this election. You remember the slight shrug of the shoulders as we started. It was an election that no one wanted. The last thing I think any of us expected was turnout to be up. It just goes to show how volatile and, frankly, let's be honest, how interesting politics has become. Let's go to Nina in the atrium.
Doesn't it just? Tom, thank you. I'm joined by Joe Crilly from William Hill, and we'll stick in the North East there. Something surprising happened after that first Sunderland result.
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, as soon as the exit polls came out, we slashed the price on a no overall majority. We pushed the price out of the Tories. They have been as short as 1 to 33 to win the general election in the weeks building up to today. After the Sunderland result, we saw a bit of a shift towards the Conservative Party, and actually we slashed their price again. They are now favourites. They were 4 to 7 They're drifting ever so slightly, 4-6 now, with no overall majority, 15-8.
Which contradicts the exit poll, of course. How reliable is betting in comparison to the polls? Because obviously both the polling through the campaign and the exit poll are being scrutinised in light of recent elections in the last 2 years.
Well, if you'd have asked this question 7 years ago, we'd have said betting and polls, absolutely fine, get it right most of the time. Brexit, Donald Trump, even Jeremy Corbyn to a lesser extent have proved that betting companies can get it wrong, and actually we think that we still have it right at the moment. We were an incredibly short price, the Conservatives. We still think, according to our betting and according to the bets that we are seeing coming through as well, we think that the Tories might just squeak this.
OK, if we focus on one Tory in particular, Amber Rudd in Hastings and Rye, what's happening in terms of the betting on her?
Well, I'm sure she'll be feeling.
Secretary, of course.
Well, yeah, I'm sure she'll be feeling very nervous indeed. She was as short as 1-4 at the start of today. She's now 4-9, so she's still favourite to win the seat, but that price is contracting by the minute almost.
OK, and then if we turn to Boris Johnson, something interesting is happening in terms of the bets on him right now.
Yeah, well, obviously the exit polls and the way that the betting is suggesting tonight's going to go as well. It's suggesting it's going to be very, very close, and not the win that Theresa May thought that she was going to get. Her price of being Prime Minister has drifted. Boris Johnson, believe it or not, is 10-1 to be next Prime Minister, and he is now just 3-1 to be the next Conservative Party leader. As soon as the exit polls came out, we started to see a number of bets for Johnson to be the next Conservative leader.
What a difference a year makes. Joe Crilly, thank you very much. Rob, what's going on Twitter? Allegra was talking just a few moments ago about this wasn't the Brexit election that we thought, and then actually it is turning into the Brexit election. That's being reflected in what people are talking about online right now.
Yeah, definitely. On Twitter, we've seen this is a volume of, graph showing the volume of tweets about Brexit. That's where the exit poll was released. And you can see in the kind of hours after the polls closed, this is the key issue that's being talked about on Twitter right now as people discuss what it means for the country, what it means for the Conservative Party, and the various different scenarios around where different pollsters, the exit poll and others, are saying this is going to go tonight. And some notable tweets that have been sent about Brexit. Alistair Campbell, notable Remainer, saying this election is a rejection of May and hard Brexit, a vote for one to go and the other to be revisited. Paul Nuttall, unsurprisingly, also having his 2 pence worth on it, saying if the exit poll is true, then Theresa May has put Brexit in jeopardy. I said at the start this election was wrong, hubris.
We know that we have to look at what's going on in line with caveats, because of course they are echo chambers. We've learned so much about that in the past few years, but it has really been an election that perhaps by surprise has really engaged the public, and we're perhaps seeing that in turnout as well, because it was an election that many people said they didn't want, and yet it has been an engaging campaign for one reason or another, and that is reflected in the fact that people really are talking about it.
Yeah, definitely. We've seen millions of tweets over the course of the campaign about this, around 40 million tweets across the campaign itself. As people have been discussing that, taking to Twitter, I'd kind of take issue with the fact that we talk about echo chambers all the time. Actually, Twitter, if you look at the hashtags that are trending tonight around the election, you'll see both sides of the story, people having opinions, there's fun stuff in there, there's serious stuff. It's all being talked about left and right, and it's a really great place to go and look at what other people are thinking. And what we see across these campaigns is people come to places like Twitter because they want to listen to what other people are saying on all different spectrums, and then come to make up their own minds based on what they've heard.
And some people have described social media now as there being two different campaigns. So there's the campaigns that we've seen in the newspapers, and then the campaigns that we've seen online, both with the American elections, with the referendum, and now this year as well.
Yeah, definitely. We've seen that play out really in quite a stark contrast on Twitter. Today, for example, Labour and Jeremy Corbyn were way ahead in terms of the volumes of conversation that are happening. That doesn't necessarily mean sentiment. We don't track that, but what it shows is that's what was getting people talking. And maybe it looked like perhaps the Labour Party were using Twitter and our really young audience there to kind of get these young, engaged people out, get them out to vote, and maybe they've seen some success there. And I guess when we see the breakdowns of age groups, we'll see just how successful that campaign was.
Joe was just mentioning Boris Johnson there. What kind of traction is he getting on Twitter at the moment?
Well, always a very popular character on Twitter, Boris Johnson. He made great use of it during his time as London Mayor. He's definitely cutting through. People are really interested in what's going on there. But also you mentioned Amber Rudd. Hastings, the word Hastings, where her constituency is, has also been trending for the last couple of hours as well. So people are really concerned about that. And if we're talking about personalities, another person who's trending on Twitter is your very own George Osborne, who's attracting a lot of interest after his comments that this could be catastrophic based on the exit poll for the Conservatives.
It's probably a good place to leave that there then. Rob, thank you very much. Joe Quilly, thank you very much. Tom.
OK, Nina, thank you very much indeed. Well, I'm joined from Belfast by the president of Sinn Féin, Gerry Adams. Good evening, Gerry. Can you hear me OK?
There we go, Gerry. I can indeed, thank you.
This is a sort of slightly extraordinary political scenario opening up this evening. What's your overall take on it at this point in the evening?
Well, first of all, I want to deal with our own situation here, if I may. And I want to commend our leader here in the north, Michelle O'Neill, for a very fine campaign. We're satisfied that we have got the Republican vote out. What that means in terms of seats remains to be seen. But I want to thank and commend our candidates and all of their families for the effort that they have made. I listened to and watched the reportage of the exit poll, and of course, that does come with lots of caveats, but if it holds true, it would be difficult, I would imagine, for Theresa May to survive. And of course, Jeremy Corbyn has done remarkably well, and I congratulate him on that, if that's the outcome of all of this. And it's all about Brexit. It's all about here, it's about Brexit, and then across Britain, it's about Brexit as well. And you know, Theresa May sought a mandate for a hard Brexit, and your viewers may know that the people here voted against Brexit. They voted to remain within the European Union. That was ignored by Theresa May, and I think she may have got her comeuppance in terms of all of that.
OK, thank you very much indeed for joining us. We'd like to talk to you longer, but we're having trouble with the sound, so we'll perhaps come back to you later in the evening. But Gerry Adams, thank you very much indeed for joining us. For now, well, let's bring it back around the desk for a moment at this point in the evening. George, I keep meaning to ask you about this more directly than I have already. At the end of all this, unless the majority ticks up massively, do you think Theresa May survives as leader of the Tory party and Prime Minister?
Well, I think she'll be the Prime Minister if there's a Conservative majority. I think the Conservative...
Really? Even if it's tiny?
Yeah, no, I don't think the Conservative...
Honestly?
I don't think the Conservative Party has an appetite. I'm guessing, I don't think it has an appetite for an immediate sort of leadership contest. But I think there will be a huge post-mortem about having the general election, about the manifesto that was drawn up by a very small circle in Downing Street, not shared with the Cabinet, about the style of the campaign. And out of all of that, people will start to ask questions, over several years about, the future of the direction of the Conservative Party. And it's always been my contention that if the Conservative Party set itself against, part of the country, the urban part of the country, the metropolitan part of the country, that was a problem, that if you only went after the sort of UKIP vote, there was a big risk. And that is an argument we've been having in the Conservative Party for 20 years, frankly. I remember it back in the late 1990s after the referendum party and Tony Blair's landslide. And, do we go after the Blair votes or the referendum votes?
OK, Ed, I want to bring you in on this in a moment, but let's go to Newcastle upon Tyne North to see what's happening there.
Pat Ritchie, returning officer, hereby give notice that the total number of votes for each candidate for the Newcastle upon Tyne North constituency is as follows. Duncan Carlisle Croot, the Conservative Party candidate, 16,380. Anita Ann Lower, Liberal Democrats, 2,533. Timothy Thomas Marin, UK Independence Party, UKIP, 1,780. Catherine McKinnell, Labour Party, 26,729. Brian David Moore, putting North of England people first, 353. Alison Juliet Wally, Green Party candidate.
So that is the Labour Party clearly back in Newcastle upon Tyne North, but critical, as we've been discussing all evening, is exactly how the votes, particularly the UKIP votes, are beginning to pan out. That is the overall result you're looking at, but let's just take a look at the change in the share of the vote. Colin, what do you make of what has happened there?
A little more even Stephen between Labour and the Conservatives in the Newcastle upon Tyne North constituency. The Conservative vote up slightly more than the Labour vote up, both of them up about 10% though. And interestingly, we've had 7 results so far, and who'd have thought it 2 years ago, UKIP have lost their deposit in 5 of the 7 seats we've heard from, several of them places where UKIP really did pretty well at the last election, above the national average.
So, Jane, in a way, no surprise that UKIP is doing badly, but a huge amount of contention at this point in the evening about exactly where their votes are going.
Absolutely fascinating, Tommy. One of the things that we know is that the volatility in the electorate has been increasing over time, that people are switching their votes between parties, and we know, of course, that UKIP voters in particular have been very alienated from establishment politics, from mainstream politics. What this is showing is that pretty much, if you look at this seat, half and half is going to Labour, Labour and the Tories, and explaining that is going to be something that's going to take a lot more seats in order to do, but it's an absolutely fascinating result. And the assumption was, of course, as we've said many times already this evening, that the UKIP vote had to go back to the Tories. But you do have to wonder if this campaign, which has not focused on Brexit, but has focused on bread and butter, left-right issues, domestic policy, even the older vote of the UKIP voters who are perhaps a little bit scared by the social care policies and the tone of the Conservative manifesto, possibly, multiple reasons for this split between the Conservatives and Labour from UKIP voters.
Ed, I just want to ask you one thing. Lots of people, again, we've said this a few times here, but lots of people watching this programme will say, OK, the politics is interesting, but I want to know how it affects me. And they may want to know how it affects Brexit, which we're supposed to start negotiating in 5 minutes. Theresa May clearly went to the country saying, I want a mandate for the, give me a free hand to do the best deal I can get. She looks very unlikely at this point in the evening to get that. How do you think, let's suppose the Tories squeak over the line to a majority or whatever, how do you think that changes Brexit? Does she have to take more account of what the rest of the House of Commons thinks, and how does that change it, do you think?
I think when George said earlier that for her this is a catastrophic result, if the exit poll is right, is completely correct. Even if the Conservatives get a majority, for Theresa May, who gambled not just on going for an early election, but absolutely doing it in a very personal way, in a very me way, and it's, compared to expectations and in reality, a terrible result. We're supposed to be negotiating Brexit starting in a couple of weeks' time. She called the election because she said, send me into those negotiations stronger. If she's the person going to the negotiations, she would be going in hugely weakened. And I have to say, even if, as George said, the Conservatives just scraped over into a majority, I can't see how she's going to be a strong and credible figure now to lead these negotiations. I think the Conservative Party have got a big problem either side of that majority number now.
George, I sense, doesn't want to go there, but you can.
It's fair enough.
Yeah, you've watched the Tory party for all your political life. Does your instinct tell you that if her majority is pretty small, that she might not survive, or do you think they've got no choice but to stick with her?
Well, I think even if she had won a majority of 50, 60 or 70, her position in the country and in Parliament had been substantially weakened by this election campaign. I've heard talk of journalists saying that cabinet members were openly criticising the way in which she's led the campaign, the manifesto was drawn up, the actions of her team. I think she was in quite a lot of trouble with a majority of 70. No majority of all, it is very hard to see how she is a credible person to lead the most complex, intricate and politically difficult negotiation any of us have seen in our lifetimes.
OK, well, this is a good moment to come and chat to. We've got a new panel in here who can perhaps reflect on all this, and this is a good moment to have not one, but 2 former Tory Directors of Communications here. Andy Coulson, who, of course, was Director of Communications under David Cameron, and George Osborne, I should perhaps say, and Katie Perrier, who was Director of Communications under Theresa May until only about 5 minutes ago. Katie, you left, and Stanley Johnson, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting you on the end there, who, of course, you will know. Katie, you left right at the start of the campaign because you were unhappy with Team May? Was that what was the reason? And has it been borne out in terms of how it's all panned out?
No, I always said that I wasn't going to go into another election. I decided that I didn't want to kind of do that fight. I've gone through many elections before, one of them which was for his son. So I've been around the Conservative politics for about 20 years and I decided I didn't want to do any more. But this is an extraordinary night. It is only an exit poll, and I think the Conservatives do have some data to show that they will pick up votes on postal votes and elsewhere. So it is early days, but it's not looking great.
OK. You say that it's early days, but it's not looking great. You mean that you think the majority will be small, even if they have one, or you think the exit poll could be very wrong? I think that they will gain more than the exit poll suggests, but it still won't be as much as they thought. So predictions, when we were talking about 100, 150 at the beginning of the campaign, wildly over-optimistic. There was a problem with managing expectations of this campaign for sure. However, I don't think they're going to get anywhere near those numbers tonight. Andy, you know the Tory party as well as anyone, I think it's fair to say. You were part of, you know, when David Cameron was and George Osborne in power, you were trying to help them manage it. What happens next? Whether she's got a small majority or no majority, does she stay? Does she go? Does she survive? Does she not?
Well, I think unless this poll is wildly out of whack, you know, it's degrees of chaos. But it's
that's the good news.
But it's chaos, you know. And by the way, I think you know, an element of that chaos will be playing out now behind the door of number 10 with the civil servants, because Brexit is right around the corner. Those plans have been, you know, the focus really of the civil service machine for quite some time now. What does this result mean for them? You know, the guys who are actually going to be kind of running that machine and making sure that we are in a position to negotiate with some strength. So you know, the campaign has not been a success. I don't think anyone would try and argue otherwise.
Possibly looking like a bit of an understatement at this time in the morning, but let's see.
An understatement, perhaps. We'll see when we get the final numbers. And, you know, I think what's clear is that the youth vote has come out in strength and lashed out pretty aggressively. And, you know, for me, the problem with the campaign was a sort of disconnection, really. You know, Theresa May, for a while, had that, rather brilliantly, actually, seized the moment and had sort of status almost of an outsider. She was seen to be kind of running against the political grain, if you like, and I think that's very attractive for people right now. And during the course of the campaign, she's kind of lost that somewhere.
OK. Stanley, what do you think happens next? I don't want to interview you about your son, but I'm told that he's the odds-on favourite to be the next leader of the Tory party. But anyway, let's leave that to one side.
Let's talk about Brexit.
Yeah, well, let's, because that is arguably the key issue going forward.
I did years and years and years in Brussels. I did years and years in the European Parliament. And I look at this event not necessarily as a disaster tonight. Yes, of course, I'm sorry that the Conservatives haven't quite got what they want. But if you look at it from another point of view, Mrs May very clearly presented this as this is a Brexit moment. We've got to have a firm, tough negotiation on Brexit. Now, it'd be perfectly possible to say to yourself, and I am saying it to myself now, look, maybe out there in the country, people aren't quite as determined about Brexit as Mrs May thought they were. Do you see what I mean? You could.
Well, I do see exactly what you mean, but it's a fascinating question. So are you essentially saying that this will substantially change the nature of the Brexit that we end up with?
I think it certainly will. I think it definitely will. I think you could even say that it'll put into play some other issues of Brexit which we haven't really been thinking about a lot. I mean, my particular case, as you know, I set up something called Environmentalists for Europe. Environment didn't feature. It hasn't featured as part of the argument. I think you could imagine in a Brexit negotiation, which is, as it were, less hard than it might otherwise have been, some of these issues, like what happens to the environment, what happens to social regulation, get a much greater airing than they might. So to that extent, A, I'm never gloomy anyway, and B, I'm not massively gloomy about what's happening tonight.
Can I, Katie and Annie, can I flip that to you then? How does that pan out? Does this, in your view, change the nature of the Brexit we'll end up with? She wanted to clearly have a big Commons majority, and it seems very unlikely she's going to get it. Katie, does that change the nature of... I mean, you were, up until very recently, on the inside of trying to sort all this out and manage it. Do you think it changes it?
I think everything is up in the air tonight, and we don't quite know how it's going to land.
That's an understatement as well. We're doing well on the understatements here.
We don't know how it's going to land, and so we really don't know as to who is going to make up the House of Commons, the actual majority, but not just that, those individual MPs. Will they be Remain MPs? Will they be Leave MPs? Theresa May wanted to bring the country together and say that we're past all that now, and maybe tonight it will show that we haven't got past that at all.
Yeah, maybe there's a bit of a kickback. Huh?
Well, certainly. Well, if it looks like this is already been called the revenge of the young, which is, you know, may or may not prove to be true.
The revenge of the Remainers.
Revenge of the Remainers. But what do you, Andy? If you were still in power, you'd have to be managing this tomorrow morning. If you were still in power, if she scrapes over the line, let's just assume she does get a majority or she can form a government. Would you agree that everything has changed anyway?
Everything has changed.
As in Brexit, as in the kind of Brexit you can pursue?
Yes, I would. Yeah, of course it's going to be. Has to be. But it's not entirely dissimilar to 2010 in some ways, in that, you know, your kind of long-term political strategy kind of goes out the window for a while, because you just got to get it. You just got to get over the line, right? And if the numbers play out that way, where we do end up with difficult math, you know, and there's a man sitting not far from us here right now who always was quick to remind us that in the end politics comes down to math. If the math is difficult, really the kind of thought process now for Theresa May and her team is just how do we make this work? How do we get the mechanics in place?
Okay,
so trying to work out what that means for Brexit, I'm afraid, is a way down the road.
Okay, well, we'll come back to it. I wouldn't much want to be inside Theresa May's house tonight as they try to work all this out. Now, you may have noticed that we've just called Kettering at the bottom of the screen, and I probably better explain again that, as I said at the start of the night, we have a journalist in every single count all over the country. That's 650 of them, and they are calling in the results as soon as they are confident that they know what the result is. That's usually quite a few minutes before the returning officer goes on stage and gives the formal results. So you will see these results popping up throughout the evening, and we hope you'll see the results here first. Now, one of the areas of the country that is very much in play tonight, perhaps unexpectedly, is Scotland, and Martin Geisler joins us from there. Martin, I understand that there are potentially some very big names in Scotland in the SNP who may be slightly worried at this point in the evening.
Yeah, Tom, absolutely. Let me caveat this. Let me wallpaper this with caveats at the very start and say I am not calling anything. I'm not confident of any of these results. It is very early and there's a long way to go. But let me tell you about what some people are saying from counts around the country in terms of names. There was Angus Robertson, for example, the SNP's leader in Westminster. His constituency is Murray in the north of Scotland. It's an interesting constituency. It was the closest Scotland came to delivering a pro-Brexit vote. It was not pro-independence in the Scottish referendum, so you wouldn't think there was a great love for the SNP there, but he's held it for a while, and it's been in SNP hands for a long time. There's talk of that being very much in play tonight. Next door to that constituency, Gordon, Alex Salmond's constituency. We're hearing from the count there that his vote is not at the stage that he would perhaps want it to be at this evening, but that could go one of two ways. Labour, the Lib Dems and the Tories, we're hearing there, are all performing well tonight. That could split. If it splits between the three opposition parties there, Alex Salmond could hold on. But there's talk that he may be worried at this early stage of the evening. Then down here in central Scotland, in Paisley and Renfrewshire South, there's talk that Mary Black could be in trouble at this very early stage. She, remembers, was the youngest MP elected with great fanfare 2 years ago at the age of just 20, and she made a big impact in her House of Commons. Her maiden speech impressed so many people. She was seen as young, effervescent, inspirational. What do we read into that? If scalps like that do fall, perhaps that some of the young people that were swept along with this enthusiasm of the independence referendum, who saw the SNP as a big, exciting alternative, perhaps they are now looking to Jeremy Corbyn's Labour, because these figures, these seats didn't really figure. Certainly Gordon and Paisley didn't figure on target lists particularly, but in Scotland we've seen certainly young people switching perhaps from SNP to Labour in the last couple of weeks. Maybe that's where an impact is going to happen. There's talk of the Tories being confident right across the south of Scotland in the border areas. So a lot in play here tonight, and perhaps some big names being absent from Westminster after this election.
OK, Martin, well, let's see as the night goes on. But for now, thank you very much indeed. Now, you will have seen on your screen a moment ago that Nuneaton was a Conservative hold. That is not a seat we expected to be talking about tonight, not by the longest shot, but nevertheless, that is the kind of night we're having. Colin, can I ask you for the significance, in your view, of the Tories holding on to Nuneaton?
Well, in 2015, Nuneaton, at about 2 o'clock in the morning, was the seat that we heard from, and then we knew that the Conservative overall majority was secure. At least this time they've held on to Nuneaton. It needed now quite a considerable 5% swing, something of that order, for the Conservatives to lose it. And we'd heard earlier from Kettering, where, of course, the MP Philip Hollowburn is a very well-known leaver, one of those guys going around the House of Commons wearing those green and black striped get-out ties. He, too, has suffered a swing away from him to Labour, with Labour putting on 10 points in Kettering and Holloburn himself only 5. So a 2.5% swing from Conservative to Labour in the East Midlands, which puts East Midlands seats the Conservatives currently hold, like Lincoln and Corby, which of course Labour won at a by-election only a few years ago, to lose it again in 2015, in play. So in those kinds of places, and in Nuneaton, when we get the full result, I suspect we'll also see some small swing from Conservative to Labour there. This does suggest that a little later on we're going to see Conservative losses.
It's an indication, isn't it, of how things have changed in the last 2 years. Back in 2015, I went to Nuneaton because we thought that was a seat we could win because we were aiming for a majority. Now, the fact that the Conservatives have held on to it is indicative of the fact they may just scrape or just not scrape a majority. The fact that it wasn't on anybody's radar shows you that expectations for Labour in this election were just much, much lower than in 2015. This wasn't really something that anybody was expecting this time round, which is a worry for
We
Labour.
haven't seen the figures yet, Ed, but as you rightly say, a 10% majority in Nuneaton was equivalent to a Conservative majority of 12 in the House of Commons. If the majority in Nuneaton is now squeezed a bit, that tells you everything we've been seeing so far about the Conservative majority dipping or, in fact, even going under the 326 level.
One thing about all the seats that we've got results for so far, all of those seats, I think I'm right in saying, have got a UKIP candidate standing. So that's going to just depress a little bit. Whilst there is a UKIP collapse, there is a little bit of the UKIP vote holding up. If what we're seeing tonight translates over lots of these other seats, we're going to be looking even further to seats where the UKIP candidate isn't standing, and then we might see those even bigger swings to Labour and the Conservatives, but crucially to Labour. So, you know, we'll be watching out for those seats where UKIP isn't the factor, or it's a factor, but there isn't a UKIP candidate to soak up some of those votes.
Do you have a view on Nuneaton, George?
Well, I spent quite a lot of my life in Nuneaton, actually.
As it happens.
2014 and
It's
2015.
been a fun life, has it?
And, you know, it's a lovely place. And, and Marcus Jones is a great MP.
Do now.
Congratulations on being congratulations to him for being re-elected. It was an absolutely crucial seat in the 2015 election. I actually remember passing Ed Miliband's battle bus going down the street in Nuneaton. So
I hope you waved.
I did wave. We were very pleased to have him on the leader's battle bus. But I think Ed's right. You know, it's worth reminding everyone that, you know, Labour are still way short of being the largest party in your exit poll. And if this was an election where we'd be talking about Jeremy Corbyn forming a majority government, he would obviously have to win seats like Nuneaton. It'd be very interesting to see whether there's a swing to Labour. We haven't got the actual result from Nuneaton, but in Kettering, a sort of similar kind of seat, which actually Tony Blair once held back in the days when Labour had big majorities, there is a swing to Labour, and that suggests that further south in kind of, you know, prosperous East Midlands towns and the like, it's... you know, it's certainly not going in the way that the Tory leadership hoped.
OK, well, of course, one of the things we haven't talked about, one of the parties we haven't talked about too much this evening so far is the Liberal Democrats. They, of course, are hoping to have a bit of a resurgence tonight, and if they do have a resurgence, that could be a critical factor in the long and complicated process of trying to form a government in the morning. Joel Hills is with Paddy Ashdown in Yeovil, a seat that Paddy used to hold, and David Laws held before the last election and is high up on the Liberal Democrats' target list. Joel, over to you.
Yeah, two seats here up for grabs, Tom. Somerset and Frome and Yeovil. Talking to the tellers from both parties, it looks like the sort of balance of opinion seems to be that the Conservatives will retain both seats, although tellers are also talking of a surge in the Labour vote. Paddy Ashdown won the Yeovil seat in 1983, kindly joins us now. Paddy Ashdown, when you heard the exit poll in 2015, you were famously very sceptical.
Thank you very much for reminding everybody of that. So kind of you. I'm not eating hats tonight, by the way.
Right, there we go.